So we left off last week with a question. I think it was a question that was posed by our Heilige president related to the first sin that man committed. That how could Adam and Chava have eaten from the Eitz Hadas, suggesting that we were created with free will. Man was created with free will. And then Adam made the decision to ignore God's decree to not eat from the tree of knowledge and decided to eat from the tree of knowledge. But what is puzzling about that is that our rabbis seem to take a different take. That our rabbis say that, the Torah tells us, Vayomar Hashem Elokim hein ha'adam, that God says that here is man, haya ke'echad mimenu, that God says that he is like me. Ladas tovara. This is after the punishment. I'm sorry. Hold on. Go back a step. Where is this? The Torah tells us before he ate. Hold on. I was reading from where he ate. The Torah tells us. The Torah tells us, "Vayitzav Hashem Elokim ala Adam lomar mekol eitz hagan achol tochal," that you could eat from anything in the garden, have from whatever you want. However, me'etz hadas tovara, however, from the tree of knowledge to know the difference between tov and ra, good and evil. We'll have to define that a little bit better. We're on page 12 on verse 17. Lo tochal, you should not eat mimenu ki bayom achlecha mimenu mos tamus, because when you eat from the Eitz Hadas, so then you will become then that will be your demise. That will be your demise. If you skip ahead. The Torah tells us on page 14, that God had given this commandment to Adam and Chava. He creates Adam and Chava, and then he fashions them. And then in verse 25, Pasuk Chav Hey, the Torah tells us in Parsha Bereshit, in Genesis, it says, V'yu shnehem arumim. We end off this whole story of God creating man after he commands man, and then he ends off by saying that both of them were naked. Ha'adam v'ishta, man and his wife. So Adam and Chava were both naked. And it says in the Torah, v'lo yisbosheshu, and they were not ashamed. They were not embarrassed. So why is that something that's significant? That they weren't embarrassed over their nakedness? So Rashi tells us why this is significant. Rashi tells us, v'lo yisbosheshu, they were not embarrassed. Shelo hayu yodim derech tznius lahavchin bein tov lara. They did not have a sensitivity to this form of modesty that we are accustomed to know the difference between that it's good or evil about their nakedness. Va'afa pi shenatna bodea, even though they do have wisdom. Man was created with wisdom. How do we know that man was created with wisdom? Rashi tells us like Kros Shemos, because he assigned the names of all the animals. The fact that he named the lion an aryeh, and he named the cow, a female cow, a para, that came with wisdom. So man was certainly created with wisdom. Lo natam bo yetzer hara. God did not create man with an evil inclination.
No.
Ad achlo min ha'etz, until he ate from the tree. And it was only at that point did the evil desire, the desire to do evil, enter into man. The yada ma bein tov l'ra, and it was only at that point that he was able to differentiate between tov and ra. So Rashi is quoting from the Medrash, telling us something very significant here, that God creates man, and God created man and woman with wisdom and understanding to a certain degree. But there was a certain piece of man that was lacking. What was that piece of man that was lacking in the form that we understand man to be today? Rashi is pointing out is that he did not have a yetzer hara. He did not have the evil inclination. He did not have inclination to do wrong. So then if that's and when did he get that? He only got that once he ate from the tree of knowledge. The tree of knowledge he was not supposed to eat from, to know between good and evil. So it just begs a question. There's a little bit of a circular reasoning that's happening. That if it is the case that Adam, that man, was not created with the desire to do evil, to do the wrong thing, so then why would he go ahead and eat from the Eitz Hadas? Right? He only ate, once he ate from the Eitz Hadas, once he ate from the tree of knowledge, so then Nichnas bo yetzer hara, then Adam, man, received the inclination to do evil. But then if that's the case, what was his motivation to do the wrong thing in the first place? This is a major question. And it really begs the question as to, well, was man created with an evil inclination or not? Was this part of the sin of Adam? Was part of the punishment is that we were created with this evil inclination? There's a lot of puzzling questions, but the major question is, what would be the motivation for Adam to eat from the Eitz Hadas if he did not have the evil inclination in the first place? So there are a number of different commentaries that address this issue. The Ramban, Rabbeinu Bechaya, Rav Chaim of Volozhin, the founder of the Volozhin Yeshiva. The Rambam addresses this. Many great thinkers. Rabbi Soloveitchik has an essay on this. There's many great thinkers that have essays on this. We're going to focus on, basically, you can sum up all of the different perspectives in really two presentations to answer this question: why would Adam have eaten from the Eitz Hadas if he did not have the evil inclination to do so? So let's start with the Ramban. The Ramban starts the following. Before we get to his answer, we have to take a step back, says the Rambam. And he writes the following. He says, Hayefa be'enai, that it seems clear to me, Ki Adam haya'osa betivo masher roy la'asos kefi hatoldos, that when man was created, how did they make their decisions if they did not have a yetzer hara, if they didn't have any inclination? Right? That's maybe even a broader question.
Why?
Because man was created with free will. If man was created with free will, we defined free will from the Rambam as that a person is able to notice what is right and what is wrong, and to be able to act on that distinction and make a decision based on what is right and what is wrong. So if Adam was not created with a pull towards doing the wrong thing, so essentially he was not making any decisions. So the Ramban says, kind of what was happening was that man was created with the natural desire to do whatever the proper thing to do was. If the proper thing to do was to eat in order to stay alive, so then he ate. He did not choose to eat delicious fruits and vegetables just because they look delicious or because he has a craving for tomatoes. Adam only ate what he needed to and when he wanted to. When he needed to, and whatever was needed for him to survive. It was not based off of because I just want to eat. He didn't eat beyond being full. He just ate what he needed to. The same was true with regards to relations with his wife. He only had relations, suggests the Rambam, when it was for the purpose of procreation. It was not for the purpose of pleasure. That is what was happening at this point in time. That's what he writes. Kasher yasu hashamayim kol tzva'am. Similar to the way that the sun rises and the moon reflects light off of the sun, the celestials do their job, animals do their job. Everyone is just doing their job in the world the way that God wants it to happen, in the sense that things are just taking nature. He was a primitive being with a higher sense of understanding, but nevertheless a primitive being. Ein lahem b'ma'asehem ahava usina. They did not make any decisions based off of love or hate. Man, at this point, Adam or Chava did not make any decisions based off of love or hate. This is what the Ramban writes. So now he continues and he says that what happened once man did eat from the tree of knowledge? What happened at that point? So he writes, "V'pri ha'ilan hazeh hayemolid haratzon v'hachefetz shivarchu ochlav badavar o b'hafcho l'tov o ra." The Ramban writes that once Adam ate from the tree of knowledge, so then it's not that he received an evil inclination per se, that he didn't necessarily have in his nature before, but a little bit more nuanced than what Rashi said. What he received at that point was desire. He received at that point passion. Man's whole nature changed. Man's whole nature changed. That he no longer was making his decisions just based off of what was the proper thing to do, what was the necessary thing to do, but rather, what do I want to do? The whole concept of wants was not in man's decision-making processes prior to when Adam ate from the Eitz Hadas. The Ramban, by the way, in a few different places, actually writes out this whole thesis. And he actually writes in a few different places that there's no question in his mind that we were created with free will, but our free will was not limited, but was there were less reasonable options for man to act on his free will prior to eating from the Eitz Hadas. Before he ate from the Eitz Hadas, things were black and white. This is the right thing to do. This is not the right thing to do. And I'm just going to do the right thing, the proper thing, the thing that I need to do. But when he ate from the Eitz Hadas, there was a third element. It was no longer just good and bad. There was also, what do I want? That never existed before. The Ramban continues and he says, V'hine achrei achlu min ha'etz. Once man ate from the tree, haisa bidatu habechira. It entered within him a more nuanced free will. Uberatzono l'hara ulehetiv. He then would make a decision whether I'm going to do the wrong thing or the right thing. Bein lo bein lacher, whether it was just an effect to him or affected other people. V'zo mida elokis mitzah echad. That has a positive spin to it from one perspective. Why? Because before this point, Adam only did what needed to happen. He wasn't necessarily thinking, how could I help other people per se? Unless it needed to happen. But it was never in his thought process of how could I bring more goodness to the world? It was only what just needs to happen. So there's a good piece to it. But however, Verala Adam. However, there's a lot of negativity that comes from it. That comes from it, this desire. The Ramban does write, by the way, that this is what the Yemos HaMashiach, this is what the days of Mashiach are going to be more like. The days of Mashiach are going to be more like the days of Adam and Chava prior to the sin. Prior to the sin, things were extremely clear. There was a clarity of what should happen and what shouldn't happen, and the concept of desire just didn't exist. After Mashiach comes, so then it's going to go back to something similar to that. Because of the clarity Mashiach is going to provide, while perhaps we still will have desire, We still will have a Yetzer Hara and a Yetzer Tov. That will not necessarily go away. But the times where we will act on our passion and our desires will be much less frequent, much less frequent. And that's why after Mashiach comes, reward and punishment is also going to be more subdued. There's going to be less reward that comes to the world for doing the right thing, because the right thing was the obvious choice once Mashiach comes. So then it still does not answer the questions. Then what was his motivation to eat from the tree? Meaning, now that we've set up exactly what Adam was in the Ramban's view, which is similar to Rashi, where man was, prior to eating from the tree, a person that acted on what needed to happen. After he ate from the tree, passion and desire, love, hate, emotion entered man. So then why did he eat from the tree in the first place? So this, the Ramban gets to the kicker. Adam, this is a wild comment from the Rambam. Wild. Hold on to your seats. The Ramban says this was a conscious decision from Adam Harishon. Man said, I want to be able to have passion. I want to be able to have love. I want to be able to combat hate. I want to live in this kind of a way. I want to decide how to bring more goodness to the world. It was a decision to be more like God. Now, if you read the Psukim again, this is not so far off. Listen to the language. What does God say once man eats from the tree? He says, once man eats from the tree, God says, I'm looking for it. Page 18. Oh, yes. Where are you? Yeah. But after that, meaning how does God describe man after he ate from the tree? So on page 18, verse 22 in the book of Bereshis, he writes, Ve'yomer Hashem Elokeim hein ha'adam, that listen, this is what man is. Haya ke'echad mimenu. He's now like me. He's now godly. Ladas tovara. He can differentiate between good and evil. Va'ata pen yishlach yado v'lakach gam me'etz ha'chayim va'acho v'chay la'olam. Now I need to kick him out of the garden, because perhaps he's going to eat from the other tree, the tree of life, and that will cause him to live forever. We're not focusing on the second half of the verse, but the first half of the verse. How does God now describe man as being godly? That he can now differentiate between good and evil. Man, once he ate from the tree of knowledge, he entered into the world of being able to provide goodness for the world or evil to the world. That's godly. God is the one who, up until that point, was the one calling all the shots as to what kind of goodness in the world will there be, or what kind of negativity in the world will there be. But once man ate from the Eitz Hadas, we now, with our passions of love and hate, desires, can start doing that. And we do that. You look around the world, how much goodness has happened in the world by man's own decision-making due to our passions, and how much negativity has befallen the world, how much evil has befallen the world due to our hatreds, and our passions. Right? If you just stop and comprehend that, that is because of Adam eating from the Eitz Hadas. So it wasn't just that he acted on a desire. In fact, he did not act on any desire. This was a conscious decision by Adam. I want to be like that. Now, how could that have even entered into his mind? How could that have entered into his mind that I want to be like that? So don't forget, there's one more character in the story. Who's the other character in the story? Aside for Adam, Eve, there's the serpent, the Nachash. The Nachash is the one that convinces Adam, yes, God said, don't eat from the Eitz Hadas, because God is the only one that wanted to have this power of bringing in goodness to the world or negativity to the world, to be able to have passions. That's a God thing, but I'm telling you, you have to do it. And the Nachash, the serpent, is the one that convinces. It's an external power that ends up convincing Adam, an external evil that was created by God, that convinces Adam, convinces man, eat from the tree so you could be like this, because this is a good idea. This is good for humanity. And Adam ends up doing it. So based on this, in the Ramban's view, which is really a three-step process where man was created with just the motivation to do what is necessary, then with this sense of wisdom as well, of being able to have certain perception of the world. Then, after he eats from the tree, step 2 is that he eats from the tree because he is convinced that this is the right thing to do, because he'll then be able to have passions and desires, which has the potential for more goodness beyond his current potential, without focusing on the negative side of it. And then step 3 is he eats from it, those desires and passions go into him. And then based on this view of the Ramban, this is the most amazing thing. Step 4, why does man get kicked out of the garden? Because he can't live in the garden anymore. Not that this is quote unquote a punishment, but rather this is the natural effect, cause and effect of his decisions. The garden was designed, Garden of Eden, which represents Olam Haba, which represents being able to actually understand God from both perspectives, from the perspective of black and white, and also being able to look at things that are confusing in the world in a very, very godlike way, that things are clear, that living in Gan Eden for a person with passions just doesn't jive. It's not possible. That's why God says, I need to get him out of here before he can't live here before he eats from the Eitz HaChaim, and then he'll just end up having to stay here forever. Adam needs to leave because it's just not possible for him in a passionate mode, in man in its current existence, to live in Gan Eden. So it's really an amazing presentation from the Rambam in how things played out. So yes, Adam used his free will. Man was created with free will in the view of the Ramban. But his free will was to decide on necessities, or to decide on how to use his wisdom and his intelligence to affect the world in a proper way. But he had no passions. Passion and desire only happened once he ate from the Eitz Hadas, after the conscious decision he made that this is the way he wants to live. I would assume that afterwards he regretted it. I would assume afterwards he kind of wished that he lived the way he did before, because after that point, his children, one killed the other one. His wife women experience child labor. Man now needs to work. Which prior to that, he was living in paradise. So for him personally, that was obviously a mistake. But that is the reason that things are the way they are right now. The way they are right now, the reason why we are fighting over social justice issues, and the reason we're fighting over how to handle a pandemic, and all of this is due to the fact that there are passions and desires that entered man once that first sin happened. Let's move on now. To the point of view of the Rambam. The Rambam has a very different view to this. And to understand the Rambam's view we have to once again read this pasuk, read this verse in the Torah that God describes how man is after he ate from the tree. So again, we're on page 18 in the Stone Chumash. If you're following at home, we're chapter 3, verse 22. The Torah tells us again, Vayomer Hashem Elokim. God says, Heina Adam Haya Ke'echad Mimenu. That man has now become like one of us. Ladas Tovara. To be able to make distinction between Tov and Ra. And the Rambam really focuses in on these two phrases, the phrases of Tov and Ra. Where basically the Rambam writes that man was desiring two things. He was desiring moral virtue and aesthetic pleasantries. So it's very different than the Ramban. For the Ramban, it's that Adam, man, wanted to have passions in the world. He wanted to have desires in the world. So that way he can be more godly. The Rambam is saying that man felt that he was lacking in his he was lacking in what he was able to do for the world. That it was very much self-centered in his existence prior to eating from the tree. After eating from the tree, Adam was able to extend himself out to the rest of the world, is why he ate from the tree. And that's why he ate from the tree, was because he wanted to understand the difference between Tov and Ra. Tov referencing this moral virtue, and Ra, negativity, referencing just aesthetic pleasantries. In the words of Rabbi Soloveitchik, the way that he explains the Rambam is as follows: that man is both an intellectual and ethical being. In distinguishing between the contrasting pairs of emet and sheker and tov ra, before man ate from the tree, it was emet and sheker. It was just truth and false. That was it. Either it's true or it's false. Versus afterwards, it became tov and ra, which is good and evil. Those are not necessarily the same thing. Tov and Ra is much more gray. Emet and sheker, truth and falsehoods, are black and white. Maimonides does not discriminate between theoretical truth and falsity and moral right and wrong. Instead, he set up an opposition between the cognitive ethical truth and falsity. So the cognitive ethical truth and falsity on the one hand, and the propriety and impropriety, what is pleasing or displeasing in an aesthetic sense on the other. So that is what Adam, that was the result of him eating from the tree. The result of him eating from the tree was that he went from this position of seeing the world as black and white, as emet and sheker, to tov v'ra, of what is pleasing and not pleasing, what is ethical and unethical. Maimonides translates the words tov v'ra in the story of the original fall as meaning the pleasant and the unpleasant, the comfortable and the uncomfortable, the delightful and the ugly. What caused man's fall is his giving preference to what he wants, to the to the delights of the world and pleasing over truth at both intellectual and ethical levels. So really what the drive was is that Adam did not want to live in a black and white world. Adam wanted to live in a world where there's also pleasantries. It's a little bit difficult to understand the Rambam because the Rambam's suggesting, it sounds like, that Adam did not have pleasantries prior to eating from the Eitz Hadas, which is very difficult to understand. Then why would God make it such a big deal? You can eat from whatever you want. Why is that something that's important? Why do I need to know that? Right? You can eat from wherever you're okay. So what? Meaning you could survive? God is giving man permission to survive? So it's a little bit strange. There had to, it's hard to say that there was not any pleasantries beforehand, but that's what the Rambam suggests. And Rabbi Soloveitchik continues and he says that the terms Tov and Ra have both an ethical and aesthetic connotations. On the one hand, Tov means the ethical good and right. That you're supposed to do good. It says in the Torah in Parshas Matos. In Parshas Matos, it says that a person is supposed to do tov, goodness, in the eyes of Hashem. On the other hand, it signifies also the handsome, good-looking, pleasing, and nice. Is also what tov means. Maimonides translate the words as tov v'ra in the original story of the fall, in the original fall, as meaning the pleasant and unpleasant, the comfortable and the uncomfortable, the delightful and the ugly. So this is what this is really what Adam wanted. He wanted the ability to know that which is right, and he wanted the ability to choose within the context of that which is pleasant and unpleasant, versus that which is true and that which is false. So he wanted just a completely different outlook on the world. He did not want. Now it doesn't really help us too much in trying to understand why it is that Adam made the decision to eat from the tree. What was how did he come up with that motivation? So you could make a similar suggestion as the Ramban, that it was the Nachash, it was the serpent that encouraged Adam to give in to this or make the decision to live in this kind of a world. But it's a little bit more difficult to understand. But bottom line, just to recap, what we've presented are really two perspectives on why it is that Adam ate from the Eitz Hadas. If it is that, as Rashi points out, that we were not created with an evil inclination, God did not create man with an evil inclination, so then what would be the motivating factor to eat from the tree of knowledge? So first we presented from the Ramban, where the Ramban says that Adam wanted to live in a state of being able to have passions and desires, where beforehand he did not have passions and desires. The ability to love and hate is something that Adam did not have. And that's something he wanted to have in order so that he could be more godlike. So it was a very virtuous motivation that was pushed along by the Nachash, that was presented by the serpent. Once he did that, that's exactly what happened. And the natural cause and effect of the consequences of that is that he no longer could be sustainable in the Garden of Eden. The Rambam presents something very different. The Rambam presents that Adam and Chava wanted to no longer make their decisions based off of true and false, but rather based off of pleasing and unpleasing. And the motivation for doing so is a little bit difficult to understand. Perhaps it's that the serpent motivated them, but nevertheless, this is what happened. And then at that point, we, as Rashi says, nichnas bo yetzer hara, the evil inclination settled within us to make our decision-making processes a lot more complicated. We always had the ability to choose. We always did. We were created with free will, but it was less complex. We now live at a time and a period that through the beginning of time, once after Adam and Chava ate from the Eitz Hadas, so now we, men and women, our decision-making is much more complex than it once was. As we mentioned before, when Mashiach comes, then it is going to go back to a similar state to what it was before. It's going to go back to a state similar where things are just so clear that our passions and desires are going to drive less of our decision-making. Doesn't mean they're going to go away. It just means they're going to drive less of our decision-making. This is why the Chafetz Chaim was so passionate about the importance of not wasting time in this world. Because once you are out of this realm that Adam had presented us with, once you're out of this realm of having your passions and desires drive you either towards good or evil, and then needing to make that decision of how you're going to choose and acting on your free will and then receiving reward and perfecting yourself, that's something that is not going to, you definitely don't have the ability to do that in the world to come, but then you're not really going to have the ability to do that when Mashiach comes. It's going to be much more limited, because things are just going to be so obvious and clear that triumph, the being victorious over your Yetzer Hara is not going to be great shakes. And that's why the Chafetz Chaim would drive that it's so important for us to recognize that we are created with a neshama, that we are given in this world to perfect, and it is complicated and complex to perfect it. But if one can overcome the Yetzer Hara that we are presented with, so you can accomplish a tremendous amount. This is what Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz, the Mashgiach of the Mir, would talk about, the godless Adam, that we kind of have Adam and Eve to thank for our capability to become great. We didn't have that beforehand. Whether or not it was the right decision, probably not. But now that we're here, we actually do have the ability to become great. And we need to be able to capitalize on that, says Rabbi Yerucham. We have to be able to get, this is what he quotes from that. This is the way this is his lesson he takes out of the Rambam. What's the purpose of this whole class? That he says that the whole purpose of this Ramban, he thinks the message of this Ramban is recognize the greatness, the great potential man has to bring goodness to the world, to perfect yourself. So that way, when Mashiach comes, you're going to be able to appreciate it. You're going to be able to appreciate the clarity that is presented with you, and not just be stuck at an elementary level of what man was able to accomplish once Mashiach is here. All right, we'll stop here for now. Next week, we are going to discuss Chana's question related to free will. That how do we reconcile the issue of divine foreknowledge? God knows what is going to happen with our free will, with our own decision making.